Hello and welcome back to Land Rover Toolbox videos. 10 spline, 24 spline. If you didn't know what they look like, you do now. On the left is a 10 spline half shaft, on the right was a 24 spline half shaft. 24 splined half shafts fit in 24 spline diffs, and 10 spline half shafts fit in 10 spline diffs. Right then, getting on to splines again, because this seems to be quite a favourite thing with Land Rover to have splines on certain driving members on the transmission. Okay, so under that little cap you have a circlip and some washers. You know this, I've already shown you. And these two washers you want to keep, and you should really have some spares just in case. Right. These shims or packers are to make sure that the end float on the CV joint is not excessive. We have done a video on this, which is available if you click onto it, and it'll tell you how to set it up if you want to understand about it. Right, so with this washer off, I'm just going to show you the play there is between the drive shaft and the CV driving member. This is actually quite badly worn. Can you see the movement between the drive flange and the shaft? Like with our LT77 gearbox, if we lose the splines, we lose the drive. Now I've just taken this off, and I'm going to have a good look at the splines both on the driving member and the driven member. Right, so you can see the shiny bits here, that's where it's worn. This is very excessively worn and it is in need of changing, well, almost immediately. And you can see the splines on the CV joint are half gone as well. This is something to pay serious attention to every time that you do something like brake discs or any type of repair. Make sure that these splines are in very good condition. If they're not, replace them. If you're not a regular, have a look at our LT77 video where we explain about spline wear. Spline wear, once it starts to wear, just gets worse until you lose drive somewhere in your drivetrain. Okay, this CV driving member actually stripped the splines, even though there is a little bit left, and the vehicle lost its drive. So if you haven't broken a half shaft, the splines may be stripped. Right, so we've got a load of CV joints on the table here, and they're all in varying conditions. This one happens to be a GKM one, which should be better quality than some of the others that you can buy on the market. It's come out of a second-hand axle, and I'm putting a brand new driving or driven member on it, or the flange hub, whichever you want to call it, tapping it with a soft hammer. You can see that there is actually a little bit of play. Now you've got to work out sensibly what is acceptable. If there's too much, then obviously you're going to lose drive over a period of time, whereas this one doesn't look too bad at all. The other thing we'd check with a CV joint, obviously, is the other end splines. With the CV joints also, you need to check the spline wear here and the movement in the balls to see how worn they are. Okay, so this one's got some play in it, and not really too happy with this. I want the least amount of slack possible. You can see the movement on that. Now I just want to show you something. The half shaft end is 24 spline. We've established that because it fits in the diff. Your flange or driven member, or the hub flange, also is a 24 spline. As you can see here, it fits quite nicely. On older vehicles, this is off a 90 with drum brakes, which would be 1980s. This is also 24 spline on the driving member, or the driven member. Okay, so the older rear flange will not fit the CV on the front, so just be aware not all pieces fit all vehicles. Okay, now these splines can wear, but they don't wear as much as any of the others. This end here, which goes into the diff, also can wear, so you need to be aware of that and have a look to see how the splines are. This one looks okay, there's not half of them missing. So with CV joints, you can have 23 splines which fit into the CV joint. The clip's removed and that slips in nicely. Just be aware that there are different types of CV joints. Right, now drive shafts here, we have one that is off a TD5 and the other is off a Discovery or a Defender. And you can see the collar on the Defender one. The other side one is a 24 spline from a later TD5 or even a Puma, okay? Still 24 spline. Right, now the collar here where my thumb is, I'm pointing to, this is where the seal runs, okay? This stops axle oil leaking into the swivel and vice versa. The seal, which will be this one here, okay? This is a Bearmark one, which comes in the swivel housing seal kit, which you get your gaskets with it, or you can buy them separately as FDC 3276G. The G on the end of the part number means they're OEM equipment, and it fits in the swivel just here. Now these are worth replacing because they do eventually leak. Should also check the condition of them to see where the seal land is and where the seal runs. If it's worn, then that will keep on leaking. Okay, so with our Defender, we had oil that was quite a lot of it in one side. Okay, that's acceptable. There's still oil that's lubricating the CV. However, on the other side, it's a different story. Just taking this off, you can see there's not as much oil because it's been escaping either through the swivel seal or into the axle. This would be a problem over time. Your CV joint would fail due to lack of lubrication. Seen here with the swivel removed, you can clearly see that the grease has been leaking through into the axle casing. Perhaps not so much of an issue, but just remember that the diff oil level is actually different to that of the swivel housing, so this needs to be attended to. Right, the CV joints, you can have ABS and non-ABS, and they can fit both housings, but it very much depends on the model, so you have to be careful when fitting CV joints. If you're unsure, fit like for like. Our non-ABS 300 TDI Defender will take a CV joint with an ABS ring cut into it. Not all swivel housings will take this, however, but the later ones will, and this will cut down on hassles because this is a Discovery CV joint. Okay, so the other alternative is a very heavy duty CV joint from Ashcroft's. Okay, now this won't bust under stress. However, it won't fit to a standard half shaft. So unfortunately, this is only for show, and I'm going to put it back in the box and send it back. You need half shafts and you need the driven flange members, which are heavy duty as well. These are available from Bearmark, but they are made by Ashcroft's Transmissions, which have a good reputation. If you need to find out more, then get in contact with them to see what you need. Unfortunately, it's very pricey. CV joints needs a molybdenum grease, which is CV litho moly grease, which is for constant velocity joints. You can buy it in pots like this, and it's not to be confused with wheel bearing grease or multi-purpose grease, which is no good for a CV joint. These ones here, this was off a Freelander, it's off a car actually, does the same job and is packed with the same stuff. What you'll notice is this construction is very similar to the one we have on our Land Rover. However, we have a beam axle on our Land Rover, so it's fairly rigid. That only has to work in one way, whereas a drive shaft operates at different angles at different speeds. This is why it's called a constant velocity joint, because at a certain angle it will deliver the same torque. The only difference is our Land Rover one has a housing for it, whereas a car doesn't. Right, anyway, this grease here I've packed it out with CV joint grease, and you usually get that with a CV kit. You can use one-shot swivel housing grease as well, because it will have the molybdenum stuff within it. Okay, to fill the swivel housing, you have a bung plug at the top here, and I'm sure you all know this, but I'll tell you again. You also need to fill it at an angle so you can actually get it in. Right, so we're going to put the one-shot grease in there. Before we actually go ahead and put the one-shot grease in, we need to put the stub axle in, okay, lubricated, and it will fit on as such, okay. It's bolted up and torqued up. You also need to, with these bolts, use some thread lock. Torque setting, okay, with a torque wrench, the torque setting is on the screen now. Okay, this is not being lazy, it's just the fact that I have to do quite a lot of work with the video, so I'll also use a battery gun to do up bolts. Obviously this is not ideal because you still need to use a torque wrench afterwards. Okay, so we use a torque wrench, And you see the plate behind is actually a mud shield, which also operates almost as a spring washer as well. Don't do what I did earlier and actually forget to fit it and then torque the bolts up. I'd recommend also to go around the bolts twice to make sure that they're all at the right torque. Okay, if you've got a later vehicle, the stub axle actually has a seal in there, and when you fill up your one-shot grease, it will not come out through the stub axle. Earlier ones will, because they will be oil filled. As I said before, you need to turn the swivel housing to full lock to be able to get the grease into the housing. The square drive here, you can use a 13mm spanner. On later Defenders, this is a 3/8 drive which you can use an adapter for to unscrew.